Greetings, everybody. I'm Joshua Orro, the Mustang Prince, and welcome to Mustang Prince Orro Reports. Well, folks, it's October, which means Nightmare Month is back. And to start off this spooky time of year, I want to take a look at a Disney double feature movie that is and isn't related to Halloween. But before we get started, how about a little backstory? Last year, not too long before we were forced under COVID lockdown, I looked at a Disney package film called Fun and Fancy Free, which contained two stories, Bongo and Mickey and the Beanstalk. Now, while some people may love the second half of that film, mainly due to it starring Walt's famous mouse, to me, Fun and Fancy Free is still a fun Disney movie, and the main reason why Disney was making animated package films during most of the 40s was mainly in order to fundraise the company due to World War II, which ended in 1945. By the way, for many weeks now, I have been thinking about making plans to look at some of the other Disney package films like Melody Time or Saludos Amigos. But maybe during my 10th season in 2022 or in 2023 during the Endgame year. Anyway, the film we'll be looking at tonight just happens to be Walt's final package film during the 1940s before returning to making full-length animated feature films during the 50s onwards. The question is, does it still hold up these days? Well, let's take a look. Released on October 5th, 1949, the movie is The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad. Now, this movie contains two animated adaptations based on classic literature, one being The Wind in the Willows by Kenneth Grahame, and the second being The Legend of Sleepy Hollow by Washington Irving. In The Wind in the Willows, J. Thaddeus Toad, the happy-go-lucky upper-class proprietor of Toad Hall who believes in fun and adventure, has built a great deal of debt from disregarding the financial responsibilities of his insatiable love for transportation vehicles, such as the newfangled motor car. His friends Mole, Rat, and Angus McBadger try to help him when his mad mania leads to the loss of the deed to Toad Hall and a charge of car theft. Toad is thrown in jail, but thankfully his loyal horse, Cyril Proudbottom, pays a visit and influences him to escape, which he does, only to learn that Winky, the tavern keeper, and his weasel henchmen have taken over Toad Hall. With his friends, Toad redeems his good name by recovering the deed to his estate. In The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, the gangly and lanky Ichabod Crane is the new schoolmaster in Sleepy Hollow, New York. His somewhat odd behaviors make him the ridicule of the rambunctious and robust town bully Brom Bones. Despite his unattractive appearance, he quickly proves to be a ladies' man who charms the local town beauty, Katrina Van Tassel, a beautiful young woman who is the daughter of a wealthy farmer. Much to Brom Bones' displeasure, Ichabod has his eye on the Van Tassel wealth. His subtle rivalry decides that he is a little too successful and needs convincing that Katrina is not for him. After a number of unsuccessful efforts, the situation changes when Brom decides to take advantage of Ichabod's superstitious behavior. Brom musically tells the tale of the Headless Horseman to frighten the schoolteacher. That Halloween night, Crane's lonely ride home on his plow horse, Gunpowder, becomes more lively than he ever imagined as he encounters the terrifying Phantom and is mysteriously missing the following morning. So, what are my thoughts on this movie? Well, while I technically didn't grow up with half of this movie during my childhood, I think it makes a pretty decent double feature Disney movie. But to further explain why I think so, let's move on to Mustang notes. Now, as I said earlier, this movie was Disney's final package movie of the 1940s, but it wouldn't be until March 1977 when Disney would produce another package film with The Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh. Anyway, in 1938, James Bredero and Campbell Grant pitched to Walt Disney the idea of making a feature film of Kenneth Graham's 1908 children's book, The Wind in the Willows. But Darrow and Grant felt that The Wind in the Willows, with anthropomorphic animals, could only be produced using animation. To persuade Walt to approve the film, Darrow and Grant prepared a Leica reel, which combined storyboard stills with rough dialogue performed by members of the animation staff. Walt Disney was skeptical, however, and felt it would be awful corny, but they acquired the rights in April of that very year. The film was intended to be a single narrative feature film with the title of the same name. After some delays due to story rewrites, James Algar was appointed to direct the film. By April 1941, work on The Wind in the Willows had begun as animators and writers had come from Bambi, which was nearing completion at the time. When the Disney animator strike was finished in October 1941, Joe Rosenberg of the Bank of America issued an ultimatum in which he would permit an absolute loan limit of $3.5 million, and in return, he ordered the studio to restrict itself to producing animated shorts and to finish features already in production, but no other feature film would begin work until they had released and earned back their costs. In response, the studio's feature film production was heavily scaled back, while The Wind in the Willows was kept in production as animation work had already begun. However, after reviewing the animation footage, Disney decided to shelve the project, deciding that the quality was too far below the standard necessary to be successful on the market. The Wind in the Willows resumed production in 1946. Following his military service in World War II, animator Frank Thomas was assigned to direct additional footage for Wind in the Willows alongside James Algar in hopes of salvaging the project. Under Walt's strict orders, the film was shortened down to a length of 25 minutes. However, the project was shelved again following layoffs in August 1946. Meanwhile, during December 1946, Disney started production on a new animated feature film, an adaptation of Washington Irving's The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, which was to be co-directed by Jack Kenny and Clyde Geronimi. Around the same time, there were plans developed to combine The Wind in the Willows with The Legend of Happy Valley, aka Mickey and the Beanstalk, and The Gremlins, an original story developed by author Roald Dahl into a package film titled Three Fabulous Characters. When The Gremlins failed to materialize, the title was changed to Two Fabulous Characters. In late 1947, Disney decided to pair The Legend of Sleepy Hollow with The Wind in the Willows into a single package movie, as neither part was long enough to be a feature film. The new film was later given its final title as The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad. Also to note, in 1950, the movie won a Golden Globe Award for the Best Color Cinematography, and beginning in 1955, the two portions of the film were separated and televised as part of the Disneyland television series. They were later marketed and sold separately on VHS. Now, in my opinion, the hand-drawn animation used for both stories is very classical, and I find it interesting that the film's directing animators were 6 of Walt's 9 old men. To me, I liked how these legendary guys designed not only the characters, but also places like Toad Hall, which to me looks like a fine grand English estate, and the town of Sleepy Hollow, New York, which looks like a quiet colonial village, but sometimes foreboding at the same time. By the way, while I have passed by Sleepy Hollow during Easter 2005, did you guys know that there's a Sleepy Hollow in Dana Point Harbor in my home state of California? Well, I sure as hey didn't, until one of my job coaches took me to lunch there 7 months ago. Also to note, Since this movie's stories are both based on classic literature, I like that its framing device is a library, which kind of looks like the library used for Walt Disney's Disneyland TV show. Now, let me tell you some of my thoughts on each of these stories. Starting with Wind in the Willows, like with Mickey and the Beanstalk, I grew up with this cartoon a lot when I was little, since that was part of the Walt Disney Favorite Stories VHS collection. And to me, this cartoon is a very zany and fun segment with memorable characters and goofy shenanigans, especially during scenes where Toad goes mania. And I thought the trial scene was very, very serious. Also, I like that this cartoon includes London Tower, which, may I remind you, was my very first stop when I went to London back in summer 2010. Plus, there were a couple other memorable moments, like the part where Toad tries to avoid the cops while escaping in disguise, and the final climax scene where Toad and his friends are trying to get the deed away from Winky. Oh, by the way, that scene was later recycled for a scene in The Jungle Book and The Prince and the Pauper. Also to note, Wind in the Willows later became a ride at Disneyland ever since 1955, and Toad Hall became part of the Storybook Land Canal boat ride. Plus, several Wind in the Willow characters got to have appearances in Mickey's Christmas Carol, and there was a live-action film directed by Terry Jones in 1996. Now let's move on to The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. Now, I must admit, I never actually saw this cartoon in full when I was little. Also, it's been a very, very long time, so I may not remember precisely how I was introduced to this American Gothic story. I mean, I think I was introduced to it from a short book that my mom read to me and my sister, or maybe I was introduced to it from an elementary school play that I saw during an assembly. Also, I did see a scene from this cartoon on 2 Disney Halloween specials from the 80s, which were A Disney Halloween and Disney's Halloween Treat. Plus, during my junior high age, I read a book version of this cartoon, which came from the Disney Classics series, while I was at an after-school kids club at the Mission Viejo Christian Church. Anyway, to me, while most of this cartoon feels very classical and sometimes silly, I thought the third act, where Ichabod is trying to get back to the schoolhouse through the forest, was very, very spooky, especially with all the creepy noises, and it was very intense while Ichabod was being chased by the Headless Horseman. And the ending, while ambiguous, was very, very tragic. Also, many years later, Disney's version of The Legend of Sleepy Hollow not only influenced Tim Burton to make his own version of the legendary tale, but also the Headless Horseman would appear as a signage of the Sleepy Hollow refreshment restaurant at the Magic Kingdom Park in Walt Disney World, and during Disney's Halloween time in California, the Headless Horseman appears as a centerpiece figure on Buena Vista Street at Disney California Adventure. Plus, a few years ago, I came across an animated TV special version of Sleepy Hollow on YouTube called The Haunted Pumpkin of Sleepy Hollow, released in 2003, which in my opinion is a pretty decent family movie. And now let's move on to the songs. First, we come to the only song in Wind of the Willows, the Merrily song, sung by J. Thaddeus Toad and his horse Cyril Proudbottom while going around the British countryside in a canary-colored gypsy cart. Now, to be honest guys, before I watched Wind in the Willows on VHS, this song was what actually introduced me to this cartoon in the first place, thanks to the You Can Fly Disney sing-along video. Anyway, to me, this has got to be one of my favorite classic Disney songs ever, despite the fact that things get wrecked while Toad is recklessly driving his cart around. Now to move on to the very first Legend of Sleepy Hollow song, Ichabod Crane, which is performed during the mid-opening of the film as the townsfolk of Sleepy Hollow observe Ichabod Crane arriving and passing through town. In my opinion, This song sounds like a classical Disney oldie, mainly due to the Wellingtons' chorus vocals. Also, I like the use of old-timey phrases like odds budkins and gadzooks, which I think works for the 1790s time period. Plus, I kinda get the feeling that this song might have influenced Alan Menken and the late Howard Ashman to make Belle's song in Beauty and the Beast. Next is the sorta romance song, Katrina. And in my opinion, this song is okay, but on the other hand, it makes a good poem song while describing this colonial beauty. And now for the most memorable song in the entire movie, the Headless Horseman song, sung by Brom Bones during the Van Tassel Halloween party. To me, this song is both a villain song and a ghost story song. Plus, I think it makes a pretty catchy tune, though it may be pretty scary for the young ones listening. Also, I think one of the guests at the party might have influenced Brad Bird to make Anton Ego for Ratatouille. Also, I know this is off topic, but I kind of think that ghost stories about Sleepy Hollow and the Headless Horseman might have been the inspiration for a campfire ghost story about the Headless Horse that Rainbow Dash tells in Season 3 of My Little Pony. And now let's move on to the characters and the voice actors who brought him to life. Let's start with Basil Rathbone, who narrates The Wind in the Willows. For those who don't remember, Rathbone is the guy who made Sherlock Holmes famous. Plus, he cameoed as Holmes in The Great Mouse Detective with audio archives due to his death in 1967. Anyway, in my opinion, Basil Rathbone's narration is very fitting to Toad's story, mainly due to it taking place in the UK. Plus, he sounds very suave and morally ambiguous. Also, I find it interesting that Rathbone mentions other classic British literature characters like Robin Hood, King Arthur, Becky Sharp, Sherlock Holmes, and Oliver Twist. And now, let's talk about the main character of Wind in the Willows, J. Thaddeus Toad, voiced by the late Eric Blore. Now, I find Toad to be one of the zaniest Disney characters from Walt Disney's time. Also, while Toad can be a true friend with his heart in the right place, and he's also a lover of adventure, at the same time, Toad can be very crazy and reckless while driving around caravans, motor cars, trains, and airplanes. Also, I thought it was really stupid of Toad to trade Toad Hall for a stolen motor car. Anyway, I thought one of the funniest things that Toad does is throwing paper airplanes at Winky and his weasel henchmen during a grueling chase around Toad Hall while trying to retrieve his deed. Next up is Toad's horse, Cyril Proudbottom, voiced by J. Pat O'Malley, whom has been in Disney's Alice in Wonderland, 101 Dalmatians, Mary Poppins, The Jungle Book, and of course Robin Hood. To me, Cyril would have to be my absolute favorite character in this segment, and I like that he and Toad are very close friends. Plus, I like the part where Cyril tells the judge, the court, and the prosecutor about how Toad got the motor car, and I like the part where he gives Toad a disguise and a plan to escape prison. Next we come to Angus McBadger, voiced by Campbell Grant. Angus is a Scottish badger who usually hangs around Toad Hall, keeping Toad's affairs in order, until he finds himself at his wit's end, having to record costly sums for damages and destruction, as well as keeping debtors away. Later, on Christmas Day, after Toad seeks refuge at Ratty's house after escaping from prison, McBadger alerts them that the Weasels have overtaken Toad Hall with Winky as their ringleader, and he reminds Toad that in order to prove to the law that he was innocent, they have to get the deed back from Winky as proof. Next we have Toad's closest friends, Mr. Water Rat, voiced by Claude Allister, and Mr. Mole, voiced by Colin Campbell. To me, these guys are like an animal version of Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson. Plus, Ratty is described as a bit of a strict, as well as a bit stuffy, but a really fine fellow. And Molly is a loyal, kind, and sympathetic character. Next we have the prosecutor, voiced by John McLeish. This guy serves as a minor antagonist during the trial scene where Toad is accused of stealing a motor car. To me, I think he's a very corrupt character who seems to be interested in just throwing Toad in jail, which, now that I think about it, kind of sounds like how Sour Kangaroo and the animals of the Jungle of Newell were behaving towards Horton the elephant in Horton Hears a Who and Seussical. The last Wind in the Willow character to talk about is Mr. Winky, voiced by Ollie Wallace, who composed this film and many other classic Disney films until his death in 1963. Now, I could be wrong, but I think Winky might be Disney's first twist villain. When we first see him, Winky seems like a friendly barman, while Toad offers to sell Toad Hall in exchange for a motor car that his weasel henchman had stolen. And he signs the deed as a witness. But during the trial, Winky reveals his true colors as he turns traitor on Toad by implicating him for trying to sell him the stolen motor car, which gets Toad sent to prison. Also to note, Winky isn't the only Disney villain who had weasel henchmen. Years later, Judge Doom in Who Framed Roger Rabbit had a few weasels on his tomb patrol, and Captain Pete in The Prince and the Pauper had weasel guards. Next we come to the Legend of Sleepy Hollow narrator, Bing Crosby, who you may remember for singing White Christmas and other classical songs. To me, Bing Crosby is a very influential guy, and believe it or not, he became an inspiration for many classical male singers such as Perry Como, Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, Dick Haymes, Elvis Presley, and of course, the Beatles' John Lennon. As for Crosby's narration, well, I think he does a great job telling the legendary story of Ichabod Crane, while also doing most of the character voices, which is kind of similar to other actors like Dinah Shore in Bongo, Sterling Holloway in Peter and the Wolf, and Peter Ustinov in Winds of Change. Plus, Crosby mentions other classical American literature characters like Paul Bunyan, Pecos Bill, Johnny Appleseed, Black Bart, Davy Crockett, and Daniel Boone. Next we come to the main character of The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, Ichabod Crane. In the story, Ichabod is a tall but lanky schoolmaster who has a huge appetite, and he loves reading and teaching the village children. But also, Ichabod is very superstitious and a little bit greedy, but at the same time, I felt sorry for the poor guy after the Headless Horseman catches him. Also to note, Ichabod kind of reminds me of Leon Tolchinsky from Neil Simon's Fools. Next we come to Abraham Van Brunt, aka Brom Bones. To me, Brom seems like an American colonial version of Gaston from Beauty and the Beast, mainly due to him being the village hero, and he's also a brute. Also, I think the rivalry between Brom and Ichabod can be pretty funny while he's trying to gain the beautiful Katrina's affection. Speaking of which, next we come to Katrina Van Tassel, daughter of a wealthy farmer named Baltus Van Tassel. To me, while Katrina may be the village beauty, and she can be very cheerful, graceful, demure, smart, poised, elegant, as well as carefree and frivolous, Katrina can also be very manipulative and spoiled. Also to note, Katrina's animation design does bear a striking resemblance to Cinderella before Walt Disney brought her to life in 1950, but at the same time, I can't help but feel like she was an inspiration for the tightrope girl from the Haunted Mansion stretching room. And finally, we come to the Headless Horseman, whose vocals were provided by Bill Bletcher, who you may remember as the first voice of Pete and the big bad wolf from the Three Little Pigs. Now, according to the original book, the horseman was said to have been a Hessian soldier that lost his head to a cannonball during the American Revolution. And ever since then, his ghost has been riding through the woods of Sleepy Hollow in search of a new head to replace the one he had lost. Also, in the book, when Ichabod encounters the horseman, it's revealed to be a prank set up by Brom Bones to scare Ichabod away. But in the movie, the horseman is an actual phantom who rides through the woods every Halloween, and the only way to escape him is to cross the bridge near the church. Anyway, in my opinion, this demon is very ferocious while chasing poor Ichabod through the woods. And he's also got to be one of the most dangerous Disney villains ever. Especially when he keeps swiping at Ichabod with his sword, trying to cut his head off. Plus, I think Wolfgang Reitherman did a great job animating the chase scene. And I think Bill Bletcher's evil laugh for the horseman makes him really scary. By the way, a while ago, I learned that that laugh was later used in an episode of the Zorro TV show. And now let's move on to my final words. Overall, The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad is another classical from Walt Disney's wartime/package era. I like how this movie goes from a story about a manic toad who didn't know any better to a spooky story with a possible death. Both segments have some good animation, and even when put together, they make for a great double feature. Also, both Bing Crosby and Basil Rathbone are great narrators, and they're pleasant to listen to, and I think the voice acting and songs are as classical as Disney can get. Also, to me, I think this is a movie that I strongly recommend, especially during the Halloween season. As for my rating, I'll give this classical Disney movie 100%. Well, that's all for now. Be sure to join me next time. Mustang Power.
Yeah!
Man, I'm getting out of here.